Good morning, everybody. I am going to ask Naz to join. And then I need to get my notes in front of me because there were so many things that I wanted to talk about today and that I made a list, and now I don't have the list in front of me. Oh, hey, Naz.
Good morning.
You snuck up on me.
I'm so sweet.
Do you have my little list of notes of things I wanted to talk about? I texted them to you.
I know it's on the phone, which I'm using.
That's what I have the same problem of.
So I can tell you it's about income and child support.
Thanks.
Super helpful.
That really is helpful this morning.
I am. I'm glad.
I don't know about you, but I have woken up yesterday and today thinking that it's possible that you and I maybe have some sort of mental health problem on some level.
Speak for yourself. I'm totally normal. Thanks. So today
I don't know what we were thinking when we were like, let's just open 2 more businesses.
Why not? In our spare time. Fine.
Like, that was such a good idea at the time that we decided that that's what we were going to do. It was like, woohoo, this is going to be awesome. And now when you're like 2 months deep into the beginning of it, I'm like, oh, maybe we're going to die. I don't know.
Maybe.
Like, I'm not really sure how this is going to play out.
We'll see.
Because we are crazy people. That's what I've come to the conclusion of. I found my notes. Okay. So
I don't know what happens if I leave the chat. Okay.
So what happened this week, I have been putting together a training on mandatory disclosure in family courts, which includes a part about financial affidavits. And I was going back through some of my old posts to see like what if people liked or been interested in. And I realized that a lot of it revolves around income, which I get because honestly, I was looking, Nazarena and I have these videos that we've done trainings for our clients. It's not meant like for the general population. And so I have a training video on financial affidavits, and in my video, I was reviewing it. It literally just says, please don't touch your income section. Just give us your paychecks and your tax returns. And that is because I don't know that we ever have had a client that has accurately filled out their income information unless they've been working with an accountant. So I know this is not your favorite topic area, but
I'm just listening in today.
What are some of the mistakes, like the simple mistakes that you see people make when they are thinking about trying to come up with what their income is?
See, this is, I don't know, you tell me.
What about like bonuses, overtime, commission? I mean, that's one of the things I think we hear the most is pushback from people that their bonuses or their commission or their annual bonus or whatever it is does not count as income because it's not on their paycheck every single week.
And one of the things that we have to try to explain to people, especially if you've had this bonus that comes in every year for 5 years, it is consistent, and that's the problem, right? That's what the requirement is that it is consistent income. And I know a lot of times people think, well, it's not guaranteed. It's based off of my performance. Yeah, but you've had it for the past 5 years. That's the problem. The other thing is, how to calculate all this. Oh, the good thing is we do have some CPAs as clients, and so they can figure some of this stuff out. So that is helpful. But that
we are not CPAs, right? And sometimes I think people show up in a family law attorney's office feeling like we are accountants and can solve their problems. And we're not accountants. I assure you that I am no accountant. So there are cases that the finances are just so complicated that we cannot be involved in doing it, and we get a forensic accountant involved for us. But for the most part, I think that there's a lot of confusion over things that you don't need an accountant for, like bonuses, overtime, and commission. Even if those are not regular, right? Even if they're not happening every month or every quarter, if they're happening consistently, you know, it's not a one-time signing bonus or a one-time exit bonus. If it's based on like your performance, if it's based on the company's performance, those things are considered income, and they're basically going to get averaged out. So if all we have to look at is one annual commission check that you're going to get next year, but you got it last year, then the only thing we have to look at is that one to see whether or not it's going to be accurate for the next year. And so I think people get confused about that, about like, oh, well, I've only received that bonus one time. Cool. But if that's because you just started that position last year and you only got the bonus one time because you've only been there 1 year, then that's not going to be productive for us. And this whole bonus commission overtime thing leads to another situation where we are, oh, look, there's Sarah. That's my sister-in-law. Hi, Sarah. There's this other situation that happens on paychecks with bonuses, commissions, and overtime. And that is that it's in a different section of your paycheck than your standard pay. You also may see sick time pay, or you could have unused vacation compensation that is on a paycheck. A paycheck tells us so much information, and I'm spending like 30 minutes on the training that I'm doing on going through a paycheck because it really just tells us so much. But on a paycheck, if you are a regular hourly employee or salaried employee who never gets commissions, bonuses, or overtime, then your paycheck is probably going to be pretty accurate. But we still have to figure out how often your paycheck is occurring, whether it is occurring twice a month, like the 1st and the 15th, whether it is occurring every other week, or whether it is occurring monthly. This does make a big difference. Most people just think everything that is paid twice, you know, they don't see a difference between every other week and the 1st and the 15th. There is a difference. There's 2 weeks difference in terms of how you calculate someone's annual income. So you need to know those sorts of things. But most of the time, as long as somebody has been in a job for at least the entire year, at least 1 year, the most accurate way for us to assess their income is going to be to look at the very last paycheck of the year and look at their year-to-date number on there. And then that year-to-date number, assuming your last paycheck is the 52nd week of the year, you can divide that year-to-date by 52 and you get what the average weekly is. Again, it's kind of hard to explain this stuff without seeing it on a screen, so I'm going to do that in the training, but I just want you all to be aware that how often you get paid does matter. Whether you get tips or bonuses or commissions or overtime, it does matter. And then it brings us to the little more controversial ones, which is, does your new spouse's income matter at all in your current family law proceeding? And what do you say, Naz? Does it even matter at all? Does it have any impact?
A little bit. Tell me about it, Lisa.
It does have a little bit of an impact because it doesn't even have to be a new spouse or partner. If someone in your life is regularly, consistently contributing to the payment of your necessities, then that could be considered income to you. It could be considered in-kind income. You know, if my husband and I got a divorce and Naz decided she was going to just kick in and pay my, car payment,
your mortgage, your light, your water,
probably all of the above.
All the above.
If we're being honest, yeah. So if Naz decided she was going to step in and pay some of these things for me on a regular and consistent basis, or better yet, put some of the stuff in her name for me, right? And give me the benefit of it. Those kinds of things can be considered income to me, because if it reduces my living expenses and supplies me with a necessity that I normally would have to pay for, and it's regular and consistent and ongoing, then it could be considered income. And I had an argument about an attorney on this in mediation a couple of weeks ago, who I was the mediator. So the lawyer was arguing to me that the father paying, wrong hypothetical, the father paying the daughter, who was the wife sitting there, that her dad paying her car and paying her car insurance and paying her health insurance was not income. And I was telling them that a few years back, I don't know if you remember this, it's actually with a client who happens to still be our client after all of these years, but I had a full trial on child support on this client, and my client's dad had been paying her car payment and paying her rent and her car insurance for a while, and I lost. So, I mean, sometimes it happens that way. We do not always win, but I lost, but I learned my lesson that really it's not, it can be done, right? It can be argued successfully, and that stuff can be considered income. And it's been a while back that happened. So I don't necessarily know that your spouse's income itself is all that important or relevant, but I think that your spouse's contributions to your standard of living may come into play. Another thing about income that I think is important to know is that it does not matter if it is your side business or your primary business. And a lot of people, when they are still together, have side businesses or work overtime or that kind of stuff. And then when a divorce gets filed, all of a sudden they're like, oh, I don't have time for that side business. I don't have time for those extra hours or whatever. But most counties in Florida have a status quo order. So Naz, will you talk about that a little?
So the status quo order, and we can discuss, for example, specifically in Broward, there are lots of layers to it, right? So status quo basically means whatever has been happening prior to the filing of the case needs to continue happening. So although we're talking about income, just to give everybody an idea, if you've been having a certain schedule for time sharing, well, that's what you're going to keep doing, right? And it has all kinds of different layers, but it also includes whatever one person has been historically paying, right? So I have this in a case right now. So if there is a certain setup on the finances and the contributions that each person is contributing to the household and the expenses and all that needs to continue throughout the pendency of the case. If not, then you can be in violation of the status quo order. And the purpose of that is obviously because you don't want people saying, as soon as the case is filed, I no longer have this income, I no longer own this business, I no longer work, I can no longer pay these expenses. And it could ruin people in the middle of what could be a lengthy litigation. So status quo means everything that was happening before the case was filed has to continue to be maintained. The income, the payments of things, all of it.
Yeah, and so with that said, it's not a good idea to suddenly drastically reduce your income right before a divorce is filed. And if you are a person who does that intentionally, we have the concept of imputation of income in Florida, and you can impute income to people really in three different scenarios. The first scenario is if a person just is served, right? The case is at issue, but they just completely fail to participate in any way in the financial discovery process. Then you have the ability to impute the median income to that person. That doesn't get used, I think, as often as the other two. The other two are that the court has the ability to impute income to someone if they find that they are underemployed, or if they find that they are voluntarily unemployed. Do you want to take either of those?
So And I just want to take a step back because I think sometimes we use these words and people don't necessarily out in the world understand. So when you're saying that you are imputing someone's income, what you are saying is that legally, the judge is going to assume that you make a certain amount of money, even though you may be not, right? Because if you are voluntarily underemployed or voluntarily unemployed, then let's take the unemployed one, right? You're making no money, you have no job, but you don't have a reason that is, for example, a disability. Now, if you're disabled, there's always exceptions. But unless you are disabled and you just choose to not be working, then what the law says, what the judge will say is, I'm going to assume, I'm going to impute you as though you make at least the minimum wage, right? So that's saying you may not make that, but I'm going to, for purposes of calculating child support, for example, I am going to assume that you make X amount, which in this case would be the minimum wage, because at the very least, you are able to go out into the world and likely find a job making at least minimum wage.
But it doesn't have to be minimum wage, you guys, because it can be also assessed based on your past employment history. So I had a case a while ago that I represented a guy who he only had like a high school education. He was a smart guy, and he started this business doing some type of road construction, and he did really well. I mean, this business was netting a couple $1 million a year for a while. He was making really good money, but then some things regarding licensing happened that didn't have anything to do with him whatsoever. It was the state of Florida changing regulations, and his whole business literally just evaporated. And this guy went from personally making probably $700,000-800,000 a year to having no high school diploma and no real work history, with the exception of this business that he had been running. The median income of the state of Florida, Sarah.
In Florida, correct. Obviously for Florida cases, but yes, it would be for Florida.
Yeah. But so in this particular case with this client, the other side was arguing that his income should be imputed to be what it was before, because he did shut down the business. And we were arguing that that is not equitable under the circumstances. It was sort of a fluke that he made this amount of money. It's not like he, has a PhD or he's a neurosurgeon or something that they consistently, regularly make $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year. He didn't have any of that training or background. So the courts, if they find you're underemployed or unemployed, the basic thing they're going to do is the minimum wage, like what Naz was saying, but they also have the ability to look into your employment history, your educational background, your earning history, and determine what is a reasonable income for you to be making, since there has been a determination that you voluntarily are not working or are not working enough.
Yeah. One of the things that I have seen that happens a lot is once the wife, for example, has a baby. And once she has a baby, she determines that she is just not going back to work. But when, for example, she has been a teacher, right, for the past 5 years, and she decides to stop working, and then immediately there's a divorce, it's different. And I think that there needs to be a distinction. It's different if we have that situation where, right after that, they immediately file for divorce, as opposed to she was a teacher for 5 years, but then for 20 years, she was a stay-at-home mom, right? You can't go back 20 years and make the determination and say, well, she was a teacher back then and she earned X amount, but now 20 years have passed and now they have no work history. They cannot find a job as easily as they could 20 years ago. So there are a lot of different factors you have to take into consideration, including how much time has elapsed between the last time that person had been meaningfully employed and gaining money. So there are definitely different considerations.
The other thing that I think is important to understand and gets asked a lot is, in Florida, we don't have a state income tax, so we only end up dealing with federal income tax. Different states handle that differently, and so you do have to be mindful of where your income's coming from. Like I have a case right now that the person's income is coming from New York. New York does have an in-state income tax, so the taxes get calculated differently. The other thing is that for us as individual people, we have a lot of options in how we file our taxes. We can claim more dependency exemptions, less dependency exemptions. There's a lot of variety of ways that we do our taxes, and if you're a business owner, it gets even more tricky and complicated on what you can do with taxes. So it really, it is not, everybody, when we get on the phone with people, everybody wants to talk about their net income, which net income is what we use to determine child support, but it's not just whatever net income is on your paycheck that we use, because you have a lot of leeway to change your exemptions. So when you're in Florida family court, the court is going to take your gross income, and then they're going to do standardized deductions that you're entitled to off of that to arrive at your net income. That doesn't mean that those are your actual deductions. It means that they're the acceptable standardized deductions for the state of Florida. Now, there's some things that we can, that do shift the numbers a little bit, and that's if we're giving each of you a head of household with child dependency credits, or if it's being alternated, those kinds of things that can change some of the net numbers. But it is the net numbers we need, but the net numbers are going to be determined by us, the lawyers, or the court, not by what's on your paycheck, because your paycheck could drastically be elevated or decreased based on how you have your own tax planning set up. So that's really important also. I think another one that, I'll see what you have to say about this next, but another one that just hits all the time is when one person has a job that there is no paperwork for at all, right? Like they have a yard service, or they braid hair, or they deliver special products to people in their neighborhood, whatever it is that they happen to be doing. Yeah. So how do we handle, or what do we have any options whatsoever on how to handle those situations?
You know, and it's frustrating when a client calls, right? And they say, well, I know that they make all this money. I know they make all this money. You know, but unfortunately in those situations, the ones that, you know, Lisa just mentioned, right, there's a lot of cash involved in those businesses, right? That at the end of the day, that's the problem, is these people are being paid in cash. So one of the things that we tell clients, look, I can't make magic happen, right? I can't, there's only so much I can do. But one of the things that we can do is that we can look at what that person is spending, right? What their expenses are. So for example, if you have a person saying, I don't make any money, I cut one person's hair a week and that's all I have, and I have no money, I make $100 a month, right? So one of the things that you can look at is, how is this person surviving, right? Let's look at basic expenses. How are they paying a rent or a mortgage? Are they paying electricity? What expenses, what basic expenses do they have? What transactions can you see on their accounts, right? Because we can obtain mandatory disclosure. We can issue a request for production. We can also send subpoenas, right, to banks if they're not cooperating with bank accounts. So what is happening on these accounts? Is there money being deposited? Is there a Zelle transaction? Who's that Zelle transaction from? Are they above and beyond their basic necessities? Are they, you know, going out of town? Like, do you go look on their Facebook or their Instagram and they're skiing, right? And they're spending all this money. Well, that money is coming from somewhere. So there are certain things that we can do. And yes, sometimes we do the whole social media thing. Your clients usually are good at helping with that, right?
We've actually had
him doing this.
We've actually had some pretty fun ones with social media with people.
So fun.
Like I had one that I remember of a guy saying that he was completely broke, could not pay child support, was not even making minimum wage. And I went and looked at this dude's socials, and look, it may be a scam, right? I'm not saying it's not a scam, but what I find when I land on his page is like basically a whole promotional business about how you can become a millionaire with him standing in front of multiple Bentleys and Lamborghinis
Yes.
in front of a big house, throwing cash in the air. Yes, throwing cash in the air and telling the people, "Come live like me." So
yeah. And it's funny.
I don't know.
It's funny in the comments. We do get that. We get that a lot, especially on the trips, right? Well, I didn't pay for that. Someone else paid for my trip, right? But at some point, they can only go so far, right? Like, okay, fine, your great aunt paid for you to go to Paris, right? Okay, that's fine. But they would have to, and that's the other thing, like, there are different things that you can do, right? Because your great aunt is not also paying for your mortgage, for your electricity, for your water, for your food. Like, there are certain limits to what a judge is actually going to think is actually happening and reasonable. But unfortunately, there are only so many options we have, right? Now, you can also go to that extra step. And some of my clients are like, well, I want to hire a PI. Like, I want to hire a PI and I want to have them followed around. And I want you to see like all the things and transactions that are happening, which
actually it tied into this with what you're saying. And I almost held back my ADD, but I decided not to.
Here we go.
Because part of what Sarah was talking about in the comments that you were responding to brings me to another situation that we have had. Naz is only aware of once, but it's actually happened twice now. And I then saw it on a TV show that I'm watching right now, where a person is engaged in a cash business that they promote on particular websites on the internet, where they can get cash for meeting up with people and doing different services and things like that. And then they say that it's not them who's really selling those services. Like that's their picture, right? It's their picture on the ad for the services, but they're not the ones really doing the service. Right. They're just putting their picture there for their friend, so that it will attract the people to call, and then the friend will be the one who really shows up and makes the money. Yeah. They're not really making any money off of it. And I had a case, well, we have a case that's still ongoing with that fact pattern. You had a case that was outrageous with that fact pattern, and with a woman who was getting like hundreds of thousands of dollars into her bank account. Do you remember this case that I do?
Yeah. I do. Yeah.
We're not on that case. Like that
no,
case
we're not.
Is not with us anymore. Nope. But a woman who was getting like hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Hundreds of thousands.
Dollars.
Yeah.
And also, like, that's not me. I'm not the one doing it. I don't know who's picking.
Yeah. Or there's a gift from this person, and that's not what that is, and that would. Like all kinds of, but I mean, we're literally talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? There's only so many excuses you can use for that.
And so if you are I told you guys on another video, I've been like obsessed with Love After Lockup right now. And it was an episode on Love After Lockup where he finds her picture on a escort website, and she's like, yeah, it's my picture, but it's not really me. It's really my cousin that's going to go meet up and do the deed. It just put my picture up there. And and at first, like, I think if you're not a lawyer, you would think that's outrageous. And then I reflected and thought, actually, this is the third time that I've heard this same story.
Yeah.
So you also have to take into consideration that judges are people. So there's some things you're not necessarily, they have the ability to make an informed, reasonable finding, right? And if we have a picture of you on a dating site, Sarah's killing me. If you have a picture of you on a dating site, and then we have $100,000 of deposits going into your account over a year from random people, we don't need a forensic accountant to have the judge put the puzzle pieces together that you probably have a side business. Is it legal? I don't know. And I don't actually even care if it's legal or not. I'm just at this point trying to figure out whether it's income. Well, guys, I had a whole other thing to talk about with virtual currency, but I think I'll save it for another one because we made it through the majority of what was on that list, and Sarah's showing out on the other end. So I'm cutting us off.
We're good. All right. Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.
Sarah.